Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're talking a little bit more about the Detroit Lions and the Minnesota Vikings. U.S. Bank matchup this coming weekend. So we'll go way in depth on what the Vikings and Lions have been doing as of late. I'm sure most of you guys remember how last year went down, but the year prior is actually not too bad. So we'll go over some brief matchup history stuff. Then we'll talk about the injury report. Obviously, I'm sure most of you have heard Sam Bradford is out for this weekend, so it's going to be Case Keenum again, and we'll talk a little bit about how that affects this team moving into Sunday. And then we'll do the usual breakdown of the key positions and whatnot from Detroit and how the Vikings match up with those guys. And, you know, whether or not we think we actually believe that the Vikings can hold the Lions offense. And, you know, we'll finish up with our weekly picks, which have not been going very well for me. I'll just get that out of the way now.
That's true.
And then we'll do a little Friday Frenzy action, which remains to be decided at this point, and finish up like that. So let's jump into a word from our sponsor real quickly here, and then we'll get rolling. Black Stack Brewing, brand new brewery smack dab in the middle of Minneapolis and St. Paul. The wide range of clean and flavorful brews and a massive bright tap room. Perfect for intimate settings all the way to special events. That's Black Stack Brewing, 755 North Pryor, just north of Menards, off of University Avenue. And just one more time here, we'll probably be mentioning this quite a bit here. The Vikings at Bears Monday Night Football viewing party at Black Stack is officially live. You can check out the event on Facebook for more information. You can find, you know, both the time and the address that I give on every single show where you can find the show. Should be a lot of fun. Like I said, 190-inch screen TV, and it should be nice and dark in there. It should be a beautiful sight. So make sure to come watch Vikings football down at Black Stack on October 9th with us. So let's get into this matchup history stuff first and foremost. Drew, you've mentioned this. I feel like you mentioned this a lot. You know, it seems like the Vikings season tends to come down to what happens against Detroit. Last year we saw an overtime loss, 22-16, and then a 16-13 loss, which was pretty deflating in a game that the Vikings probably should have won. They win either of those games, they make the postseason last year. So I guess what are your thoughts on the recent Detroit Lions games and you know, how the Vikings have fared?
Well, I'm looking at the history here. The Vikings made the playoffs in 2015. Vikings made the playoffs in 2012. Vikings made the playoffs in 2009. And in 2008. Those are the last four playoff appearances. Every year they've swept the Lions. And every year besides those years they have either split or been swept. So, I mean, when we say that their performance against the Lions hinges the success of the season, I mean, the history kind of confirms it. So, I mean, last year again, one of those wins one of those games the Vikings win. The Vikings are in the playoffs. So, I mean, it's pretty significant that, you know, that tells such a pretty blatant story of the Vikings' success. So, obviously, this is a very important game. It sucks that Sam Bradford won't be on the field. Case Keenum will have to repeat what he did last week. But this is a very significant game, I think, in the grand scheme of things. And you know, when we're getting down to week 15, 16, this game, one way or the other, will prove to be a big one.
Yeah, you know, I think we talked a little bit last week on how beating Tampa Bay was kind of a subtly critical game early in the season, just because how it could play out later on in the season. We could see the Vikings come down to, you know, fighting for a wild card spot and how important it would be to have a wild card tiebreaker over a team like Tampa Bay, which, you know, they didn't look great last week. A lot of injuries were a big factor for that, but I still think that's a team that's going to be contending for the NFC wild card. So that was a big win last week. Now it's kind of it's sort of emphasized this week, right? With it being a division game, you want to have that division tiebreaker. Obviously, if you only win one of the two games, you don't get a tiebreaker. It comes down to something else. So if the Vikings can get both of these W's against Detroit, they put themselves in great position to, actually make a run potentially in the postseason. You could be fighting for home field advantage as opposed to just fighting for a playoff spot. If they are able to take both of these games against Detroit. But that's not going to be easy. It's a lot easier said than done. It's it's a dream. What other cliches can I come up with to describe the situation? It's something that needs to, manifest itself before we actually get talking about how important it is to beat Detroit, since we haven't done that recently. Like Drew said, we haven't beaten Detroit since 2015, and when the Vikings did beat Detroit, they ended up making the postseason. So these are very important games. I think that's really all you need to know about this team's history. I mean, we can go down the line and promote optimism with the Vikings' all-time record being 71, 38, and 2 against Detroit. But the fact of the matter here is that Detroit's a lot better than they have been in their team's history now. This is potentially one of the best Detroit Lions teams that we've seen in the Super Bowl era. Like in terms of the consistent success over multiple seasons. This is a good Detroit Lions team. They're pretty much loaded top to bottom on their roster. So let's just jump right into what we're seeing from this team. I think it starts with Matthew Stafford. Obviously, he's the most highest paid guy in the NFL for a reason. He throws an interception. First pass he throws as the highest paid player in the NFL is an interception. But since then, he's pretty much just been doing his thing, throwing touchdowns, leading late game comebacks. The Lions, as far as I'm concerned, are a 3-0 football team. I thought that was pretty bogus how they lost last week to Atlanta. So if there are any Lions fans out there, I feel your pain. That really sucks. I mean, as a Vikings fan, someone that cheers for the Vikings, obviously I want to see the Lions lose, but not in that fashion. That just felt very Vikings to me. So I was not a fan of how how that went down. And as far as I'm concerned, we're meeting a 3-0 football team at US Bank this weekend. So I think they'll probably have a chip on their shoulder too. What do you think of Matthew Stafford, Drew? And is he all he's cracked up to be? I suppose.
I mean, is he worth? I guess the term being worth, the biggest contract in NFL history is kind of people can interpret that a lot of ways because the way the QB market is, it's impossible to really understand who is worth what. But I think he is definitely a top 10 quarterback in this league, and I think that if you have the right timing, I think you then deserve if your contract's up or whatever, I think you do deserve big money. So Matthew Stafford, he's a phenomenal player. I think the one knock I think everybody's really had on him is that he's not great against good teams. He doesn't win games against what is it? What his record is absurd. Like on the road against playoff teams, it's something like 1-28 or something like that.
Right.
Something super ridiculous. So that's the one knock that people have on Matt Stafford. Which, ironically, this could be one of those games this week if the Vikings prove that they're a playoff team. This would be one of those games that Stafford would typically historically not play well in. So. But again, I think since the loss of Calvin Johnson, I think a lot of people expected him to kind of decline a little bit. But I think if anything, he's improved, and I think he's shown that he can be a franchise quarterback, and he wasn't just relying on Calvin Johnson to produce, and that he can make the throws necessary, and he can make those game-winning plays, and he can be a clutch quarterback in crunch time and lead his team to wins.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you bring up because I think. When Calvin Johnson up and retired, a la Barry Sanders, I think a lot of Lions fans were obviously. I mean, and I completely agree with you guys on this. I think a lot of Lions fans were, up in arms, just really disappointed, sad, pissed off, whatever word it was, because they figured that half their franchise was going down the tube. And honestly, at the time, it looked that way. I mean, Calvin Johnson was the guy in Detroit. He was the only guy that you really schemed for. And you just sort of expected that Matthew Stafford was going to throw it up to him and he was going to come down with it. Like, there's no way, no ends or buts about it, You throw into triple coverage and Calvin Johnson was still going to be there. But I think that Calvin Johnson retiring has actually made Matthew Stafford, it's forced him to be smarter with the football. He doesn't have that ridiculous safety blanket with Calvin Johnson, which I think that he used to excess when Calvin was in Detroit. So now he's forced to work the ball around the field a little bit more. Last year we saw him working it around to guys like Anquan Bolden, who's no longer in the league, but like Marvin Jones was a big factor early on before he ran into Xavier Rhodes. A lot of, if we got Theo Riddick, obviously, out of the backfield. This is a team that throws the ball all over the place. They don't run the ball especially well. I don't think they run the ball well at all, to be honest with you. But Matthew Stafford has done a good job of just, first of all, improvising. He does a great job under pressure that comes into play with his 4-minute offense that he's been so great at running, especially when his team's down in the fourth quarter. But just the fact that so many different guys of their team can do stuff on offense, and they protect fairly well as well. So this is just a good football team that. I don't think the Lions are great by any means, but they're going to give just about anyone a run for their money because they have enough talent around a very good quarterback to do some real damage offensively.
Yeah, I mean, I think this offensive line, you mentioned how they protect Stafford well. I would say half of the offensive line protects really well, and the other half does not. On the left side, you have Greg Robinson, and you have Zach Kieran, I think are the projected starters this week. So that should be very appetizing for, Everson Griffin and is it Linval Joseph on that side, maybe Tom Johnson on that side. Whoever is on the side, it would be the right side looking at the Minnesota defense, the right side on the interior of that defensive line. That person and Everson Griffin will have a very appetizing matchup. On the other side, though, you have Ricky Wagner and TJ Lang, both players who I believe the Vikings sought after in free agency this year.
Yeah.
Both of those guys have been rock solid, and that's, right. And they've both been kind of what we expected. They've been rock solid. They haven't let anything, they've been solid. They have been very good protectors. Obviously opening things up in the running game as well. So that's going to be interesting to watch, is how the left side of the line holds up, and if the right side with can hold Daniel Hunter, Linval Joseph, and company intact.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at TJ Lang, who former Packer. I think a lot of Vikings fans should be pretty familiar with him. Very nasty inside blocker. He does a really good job zone blocking, and especially straight up man-to-man blocking schemes. He's extremely nasty, and I think he's pretty funny too. He's just overall a good dude that is kind of stuck in a guard body. And I really wanted TJ Lang for the Vikings. That was, one guy that, when the Vikings were obviously trying to get after Riley Reif, Ricky Wagner, obviously was the big one from Baltimore that Drew just mentioned that ended up landing in Detroit. I was really big on getting TJ Lang just for his nastiness. He's like Alex Boone in a lot of ways, but I think he's a little bit better at the same time too. So he really brings a lot to the table there. So that right side is very solid. And I think that you mentioned a good point with Greg Robinson and on the left side. He's definitely a guy that Everson Griffin can eat with. He's not great.
We know the comments Griffin has made this week about Robinson being lazy, and it sounds Griffin's very confident, and I think he has the right to be.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, this is a former first-round pick. I believe he was drafted second overall. The same class that with like Jadeveon Clowney and whatnot in 2014. Obviously, that would make him the Anthony Barr, Teddy Bridgewater class as well. So, not. He hasn't been good yet. He wasn't good when he played in St. Louis, and he hasn't been good in Detroit just yet. So I expect that to be a good matchup for the Vikings. Let's talk a little bit about that running game, since we've talked about the offensive line a little bit here. We talked about the quarterback. Let's talk about the running game and these receivers. Starting with the running game here, you're gonna have a carousel of backs that are all going to be used during this game, in my opinion. They actually keep 5 running backs on their roster, believe it or not. And I expect them to use at least 3 of these guys. Amir Abdullah, the Nebraska rusher, everyone should probably be pretty familiar with him, a former second-round pick. Theo Riddick, former Golden Domer, basically a receiver out of the backfield. He's not a running back, he's called one. But he almost exclusively catches the ball. I'm sure anyone that has PPR fantasy leagues is well aware of the type of damage that Theo Riddick can do. And then Zach Zenner, the former Egan High School Wildcat, played at South Dakota State. Everyone in Minnesota, if you haven't heard Zach Zenner's name yet, you probably just haven't been looking for it, just because this is his 3rd year in Detroit, and just about every time he comes home to Minnesota, you see articles written by either me or someone else about him, because he's been around for some time, and he's been doing a pretty good job with the Lions, particularly in pass protection. That's really where he makes his money. So they've got 3 different running backs, 3 different styles. What do you think of what they have to offer here, Drew? Are they any better than they have been? Does this group worry you at all? What do you think of what they're going to be offering from a rushing standpoint?
Well, I think there are cues as to what Detroit's going to do when they have, the way they employ these running backs. I think if Theo Riddick's on the field, it's a good bet that he will, that Detroit's going to be passing the football, or that he will be running a route, because he's not by any means an elite pass protector. They don't use him in that situation very much. He has 8 pass blocking snaps this year, and he's run 63 routes. So and he's also had 11 carries. So, I mean, it's pretty clear what they do with Theo Riddick. He's out there to run routes and kind of be the underneath guy for Matt Stafford. And whereas Amir Abdullah, he's kind of their go-to guy on the ground. And then they bring in, Dwayne Washington or other guys to kind of supplement that as well. But it's pretty clear where they go. If Amir Abdullah's in the game, look for kind of a, there's a good chance they're going to run the ball, and vice versa if Theo Riddick's in the game. And if Theo Riddick is in the game, he's probably going to be either in the slot or in the backfield running a route because they don't keep him in there to protect very often.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the receiving group now. Like I said earlier, Anquan Boldin is no longer in Detroit. He's retired. If you missed the Anquan Boldin story from earlier this year, he signed with Buffalo, saw what Buffalo was doing, and decided to retire. So that's what Anquan Boldin has been up to as of late. The Vikings will be facing a group of Golden Tate, who might have the best luck of all time with that catch against Green Bay.
Yeah, the Fail Mary.
Yeah, the Fail Mary. But then it comes back to haunt him last week, it seems like, because he's the guy that didn't quite get across the goal line.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to make that, I wanted to make
10-second runoff.
Yeah. So Golden Tate has been on both ends of the spectrum. Obviously a very good receiver as well. Then you got Marvin Jones, who is the former number 2 to A.J. Green in Cincinnati. Gets paid receiver 1 money. I believe I've been bashing him ever since. There is also the rookie Kenny Galladay, a third-round pick, very tall guy. I think a lot of people like to say that he's a poor man's Calvin Johnson, so to speak. Detroit is very excited about him, and I think they have some reason to be. He's been one of the more solid rookie receivers to date, so he's going to be someone to keep an eye on as well. And then on the back end of their roster, guys that you probably won't see a whole lot of: T.J. Jones and Jared Abbrederis. That's the former Wisconsin Badger, Jared Abbrederis. So not a ton of depth on this receiving depth chart, not a ton of talent, but there are a couple guys up top that can really make it hurt.
Yeah, this is similar to, I think, the Giants last year, where they run a lot of 3 receiver sets. You'll see that combination of Tate, Galladay, and Jones, where Tate's in the slot, Galladay and Jones are on the outside. That's kind of their go-to personnel set. And I think Galladay, there was a time when he was a projected undrafted player, and he snuck up, I believe, into the 4th round.
Third
round even. Okay, that's where Detroit found him. So he's a bigger, taller receiver. I think he's there to complement the, smaller Golden Tate. And, Marvin Jones is an outside receiver, but he's kind of small for an outside receiver. So they wanted to get in a bigger body that they could rely on and, in the red zone. So that's kind of what you'll get from them. I would say, Golden Tate is a very solid slot receiver. He's one of the top probably 5 in the league as far as pure slot guys go. He knows how to move the chains. I think your outside receivers on Galladay and Jones. Galladay has a lot to prove. He's made a few kind of top 10 plays, if you will, those kind of sensational that kind of make your eyebrows raise. But Marvin Jones, I think he had that one breakout game last year against the Packers for 200 some yards. But then after that, there wasn't a lot out there. So I would expect Rhodes to kind of go back to staying on one side of the field, where he'll stay on, I believe that's on the right side of the field, and he'll just match up with either Galladay or Jones, whichever guy lines up there, and then the Vikings will do what they can with Tate in the slot. That's kind of my expectation.
Yeah, that seems to make the most sense. It's going to be it's going to be a collective effort here. You're going to need to see Trey Wayne step it up here. If it's Terrence Newman or Mackenzie Alexander in the slot, maybe it's Tremaine Brock, whoever it is. It's going to take 3 cornerbacks playing a pretty complete game of football to hold these guys down. Like we said before here, Marvin Jones is not a guy that is going to he's not going to always get his. This is a guy that can be shut down. Xavier Rhodes did it last year, 1 reception, 5 yards. So he's not a huge threat. I would say Golden Tate's probably the greatest threat out of this group, simply because he can do so much with the ball in his hands. He walked the Vikings off in overtime last year, so he deserves some respect. He definitely deserves the respect of Vikings fans. It is what it is with some of these guys, but at the same time, I think that the Vikings have enough defensively to hold this group in check for the most part. I think, honestly, Theo Riddick might be the most dangerous receiver relative to what the Vikings have defensively, just because I'm not sure what Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks are going to bring to the table. They haven't really faced – Le'Veon Bell they did a heck of a job with, but for whatever reason, he wasn't being used much as a receiver when the Vikings played against the Steelers. but they're going to get it's going to be a handful covering Theo Riddick. So I'm a little bit concerned with him. Other than that, primarily just Golden Tate. I want to see more out of Kenny Galladay before I start bowing down. And like I said, I'm just not a huge fan of Marvin Jones. I just don't see it with him.
Well, I think we should probably address these tight ends too, because Eric Ebron beat the Vikings pretty handily, I believe, in both games last year.
Yes, he did.
So he's going to be the guy to watch too. And when he's in the game, he's in the game for most snaps as well. He's part of that that 11 personnel where those three receivers and then Ebron at tight end. So he's another really go-to weapon that the Vikings, for whatever reason, at tight end couldn't stop last year. Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks, the safeties, I think he had 7 catches for 90 yards or something in the game, at least at U.S. Bank Stadium last year. So he'll be a guy to watch as well. And then Darren Fells is their blocking guy, their blocking tight end. That he's kind of the Red Ellison of the Lions, where they bring him in primarily as a blocker. Of his 103 snaps, he's only run 30 routes. So
yeah,
he's in the game to block. So if you see Darren Fells out there, number 87, there's a good chance that the Lions will be either A, running the football, or B, they'll be adding protection to help the offensive line. So that's just kind of what I see out of this tight end group. But I think, again, Eric Ebron is going to be a dangerous weapon for Stafford because he has been in the past against the Vikings.
All right, so let's rank the offensive weapons then, because like you said, Eric Ebron, for me, Eric Ebron's probably number 1 just because he was the guy that was consistently giving the Vikings blows down the middle of the field last year. The Vikings were dominated by tight ends for the most part last year. They haven't been as much this year to date. This would be the first game where it could be a problem just because Eric Ebron basically – Eric Ebron is kind of Vernon Davis all over again, right? Just a younger version of Vernon Davis. He plays a lot of the same game. The Vikings have had some trouble with that. So I think that he is probably priority number 1 defensively. After that, I'd probably say Theo Riddick and then Golden Tate are my top 3 guys that obviously Matthew Stafford. I'm talking specifically skill players here. So Eric Ebron, Theo Riddick, and Golden Tate are my kind of guys that you got to keep an eye on here.
I'd probably move Golden Tate up to number 1, actually. I'm still wary of the slot position, but I think there's still a lot of proving that needs to happen before we kind of feel confident in that. But, I think those 3 guys are kind of the main guys to watch for and with this Lions offense for sure. Absolutely.
All right, so let's move over to the defensive side of the football here then. Starting with the defensive line, this is a 4-3 suit per Terrell Austin, who has been a consistent head coaching candidate the last couple of seasons. So he is obviously doing a pretty good job with this defense here in Detroit. The front 4 here, the main guy that you're going to be worrying about, Ziggy Ansah, the guy who might be 94 years old. We're not 100% sure on that, but regardless, he can definitely pass rush the quarterback. He's going to be lining up at that right defensive end spot, so keep an eye on him. In the interior, Haloti Ngata from Baltimore. He's really, really old. I kind of surprised he's still in the field, but he's been very good his entire career. Next to him is Ashawn Robinson, who I believe is in his 2nd year now out of Alabama. Kind of a work-in-progress 3 technique that, I think if I'm a Detroit Lions fan, I'm optimistic about what his career looks like. Then they finish up on the other side with Cornelius Washington. So what are you seeing from this front 4, Drew? Anyone that you're particularly afraid of, or is this something that Riley Reef and co can handle?
Speaking of, we should probably mention that it's the Riley Reef revenge game this week and the Jeff Locke revenge game this week. Jeff Locke is the punter for the Lions now, but I think this is a defensive line that's nothing. I thought Tampa Bay's unit was more, I guess, scary. Same with Pittsburgh, just because I think they were very exotic in the way they would blitz and show pressure and then disguise things. And again, I thought we've talked about this too at the Saints, is that they had a couple studs up front too that were enough to worry about. So I'm not that scared about this front 4. I just think the secondary is the group to look for. But I think up front, I guess with Ansah, he's probably obviously the scariest threat. But again, I think at this point, the best offensive lineman in purple is also the one that's going to be blocking him. So I like that matchup, and I think Case Keenum, should be, held. He should be protected okay, and he should stay upright for the most part.
I would agree with you. I think that Keenum will have every opportunity to succeed against this defensive line. But he's going to have to make good decisions, right? Like you were saying, the secondary, once we get to that unit, that's really the group that you should be afraid of with this Detroit Lions defense. And it's why they're so dangerous down the stretch, right? It's because when teams are trying to fight back from being down against Detroit, they have to fight against the secondary, which is very good and has at least 2 Pro Bowlers, probably a couple more to come. But we'll get to that in a second here. Let's get into the linebacking group now. Tahir Whitehead is one of your outside linebackers. The other one is Paul Warrilow. Warrilow is from former guy for the Atlanta Falcons. Never been a huge standout player as far as I'm concerned, but that's how I remember him. And then their middle guy their middle linebacker is Jared Davis from Florida, one of my personal favorite rookies.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that he was an excellent player. Good cover guy. Plays well downhill. He's going to be dangerous for many years, in my opinion. And the other linebacker that they have, this is the guy that I wanted the Vikings to take over Ben Gideon. And that's
JRM.
Jalen Reeves-Maybin, who hasn't done a whole lot in the NFL. Don't get me wrong, but when the Vikings were on the clock to take Ben Gideon, I saw Reeves-Maybin sitting there from Tennessee. Drew and I had talked about how he's such a great cover linebacker that has a lot of room to grow, not very well developed, not fundamentally sound, or technically sound for that matter, like Ben Gideon, but he offers that upside that I really liked. And obviously now I'm pretty satisfied with Ben Gideon. I take back a lot of the things I said about him. But Reeves-Maybin is another one of those guys that if he is in the game, he's a guy that I would keep an eye on just because I do think that he has very, very good talent, a lot of potential, and that linebacking group in Detroit could be a lot better than it is now, which is already pretty solid at some point down the road.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think Whitehead's kind of the go-to, I guess, top linebacker for the Lions. But, I mean, I think this is a group that does play the run decently. I think Jared Davis and Whitehead particularly are pretty good at shooting the gaps and whatnot. But I mean, yeah. Other than that, there's not much to really say here. I think Warlow's kind of been that when the Vikings this offseason were worried about that third linebacker spot, and I mean Gideon's the guy right now, but I think the Lions probably had a similar concern, and Warlow's kind of their guy right now to fill in that spot for them, with Reeves-Maybin kind of rotating in as well. So. I mean, I not that there's. I think the run game could have some complications this week because I think again Whitehead and Davis play the run well, and they know how to. They're disciplined to get in their gaps. So Dalvin Cook might have a little bit of a tougher time this week, but
I don't think any tougher than usual though, right? I mean, this front seven is for Detroit.
The front four, I guess, should be an easier task. I like the way Davis and Whitehead play, but I mean, it's also worth noting that I think Davis still has a concussion, I believe, and so I don't think he's been cleared officially yet.
Right.
So maybe that's another something to watch there as well.
I mean, relative to the NFL, it's a solid front seven, but by no means is this one of the better front 7-4-3 units that we're going to see, in my opinion. I think it's a good group that's good enough, especially beyond the secondary, which I believe we'll probably be spending the majority of our time on here. So playing in front of this secondary, it's good enough, but I don't think it's going to give anyone fits. So for me, it's important for the Vikings to make sure that they're running downhill against these linebackers with Dalvin Cook. If Dalvin Cook can get to 25-ish carries or 25-ish touches, I might say, the Vikings should be in a good position to win this football game. That's generally a good signal because I don't think that this unit can contain Dalvin Cook if he's allotted enough touches. He's Dalvin Cook. I mean, we've seen what he can do through 3 games, and this is a pedestrian front seven, in my opinion. Let's put it that way. But attached to this front seven is one of the better turnover. I don't know. These guys do so much in this secondary. They have a lot of depth. There's high-end talent. They force turnovers, both fumbles and interceptions. I mean, this is a dangerous unit that's very aware, and it all starts with Darius Slay. The Vikings were. If you didn't know who Darius Slay was coming into last year, you definitely knew who he was coming out of last year. Big play Slay, as they like to call him in Detroit. And honestly, I can't say that nickname is wrong after the interception that he made last year, essentially to steal a victory for Detroit. over the Vikings. So he is very, very dangerous. He's a guy that was in the same conversation as Xavier Rhodes last year as far as I was concerned, but Rhodes has simply just elevated a little bit faster, gained more national notoriety, in my opinion. But he's a very, very, very talented cornerback on the outside. A guy that will probably be he'll be a problem for Stephon Diggs or Laquan Treadwell. I would imagine primarily Stephon Diggs in the slot there. And then their opposite cornerback is Nevin Lawson. I'm not too worry about Nevin Lawson. He's very prototypical number 2 cornerback as far as I'm concerned. It'll be Teez Tabor eventually, who's the rookie, but he's not currently the guy. And their slot cornerback, Quandre Diggs. I don't think we'll get too much Diggs on Diggs this year, but we did see a lot of Diggs on Diggs last year. And I would assume it'll be Adam Thielen versus Quandre Diggs, which I like the size advantage for Thielen there. I expect him to continue doing some damage, but these are some very talented cornerbacks. And then up the middle, you've got Tavon Wilson, and then Glover Quinn, and then Miles Killebrew, who I'm not a huge fan of, but I've seen a lot of Detroit Lions fans really like Miles Killebrew. But for me, it's Glover Quinn, Darius Slay, and Quandre Diggs. Those are the 3 guys to keep an eye on. Are you seeing anything different on your end?
I mean, I like Killebrew just because I think he's one of those hybrid guys that you can,
right?
You can put it like you can have a dime package per se, and he can be your linebacker, an extra linebacker that's technically listed as a DB, but he's up there playing the linebacker position, so he lets you do a lot of different things. But Glover Quinn's a freaking blanket out there covering everything. He's got the range, he's got the instincts as kind of your coverage center field type safety. I think Diggs Quandre Diggs anyway should be matched up with Adam Thielen for the most of the game. In the slot there, which I think the Vikings have a size advantage there that they should probably try and take advantage of.
Yes.
And then I do think if you can get Nevin Lawson matched up with Diggs, you should try to do that. Otherwise, I think you should target him with Laquan Treadwell. So I mean, you mentioned last week that Treadwell would be a breakout candidate last week. That did not happen. But I think this is another opportunity if things shake out properly, where I think Treadwell could have a good matchup for this game, and an opportunity to put some numbers up, have a career day, 4 catches or something.
Let's also say that time is ticking away for Laquan Treadwell. I mean, this is his last opportunity. Week, every single week, Michael Floyd gets closer to coming off of suspension, and he's got basically this week and then one more week, and then it's Michael Floyd's gonna be fighting for snaps in that rotation as well. So, it's like you said, it's not. I'm not here to predict another breakout game for Treadwell, but this would be a good time to have a career day, because he is running out of time. And I do think that Michael Floyd will get every opportunity to supplant him if Treadwell doesn't do anything soon. And just keep that in mind. This is a secondary that, like Drew said, it gives the Vikings a good opportunity to win some matchups. If you get Adam Thielen versus Quandre Diggs in the slot is a size advantage matchup for the Vikings. You'd think that the Vikings would target that often, especially given the fact that Thielen has been so successful as well. And then Slay and Diggs that's a difficult matchup for Stephon Diggs, but let's keep in mind here, we've gotten into the conversation of elevating Diggs into that top 10-ish wide receiver status. Well, part of what comes with that is not disappearing against good quality cornerbacks. So for the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about the individual matchups for Rhodes on the outside and how he's been able to make good wide receivers disappear. Well, now let's start to look at the flip side here. Stephon Diggs is going up against Darius Slay this week. He'll have Prince Amukamara next week. These are some quality cornerbacks that he's going to have to beat if he wants to get into that elite top 10 wide receiver status. And to some degree, the same can be said about Adam Thielen as well. So that's one of those kind of developing narratives to keep an eye on here. Is Diggs and Thielen in the past have kind of fallen asleep against better cornerbacks. We've seen Diggs struggle against Patrick Peterson and Richard Sherman, for example. The latter, he actually got beat on two separate games. So if these guys are going to become an elite receiving duo, they do need to beat some of these top-tier cornerbacks. And in my opinion, Darius Slay and Quandre Diggs are 2 very good cornerbacks to continue building your name on for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's an important observation here because, looking at these matchups, Saints didn't have anything super intimidating at cornerback. I don't think the Bucs had like all kinds of injuries and pretty much a size disadvantage, as you mentioned, as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans refused to admit was a problem, and then Stephon Diggs jumped over Vernon Hargreaves for a touchdown. So, it's clear that they didn't have too much to offer, and I think Slay is by far the toughest test Diggs will face, at least through 4 weeks. So if he shows up, I think then we'll start to have more support for that conversation of him being a top 5 receiver at this point this season, if he can put out another strong performance against an elite cornerback.
Absolutely. So let's finish up this defensive conversation now with I want to talk about Glover Quinn a little bit more here and how Case Keenum can win this sort of mental battle with Glover Quinn. Glover Quinn, if you're not familiar, very rangy zone safety. So what a lot of his best work is done with his eyes and his instincts. So this is a guy that basically, if they're running cover 2, for example, he's going to basically shade an entire zone and play the field with his eyes and kind of whether he's shading Stephon Diggs over the top, which is what I would imagine him to be doing. Case Keenum needs to do a good job with his eyes to keep Glover Quinn from sort of floating over to that side of the field, right? He needs to look at his first read, and whether this is something that Pat Shurmur can concoct as well, just kind of like faking a first read to the left side of the field just to get Glover Quinn ranging one step, even a fraction of a second, one direction, so he can't break as well to the ball. That's what he does best. He reads quarterbacks and gets to the point of attack faster than the receiver does. So you got to win that mental battle with Glover Quinn over the top, in my opinion, if you're going to have an opportunity to continue being an explosive offense, because he is sort of the kryptonite to. He's the type of player who is the kryptonite to explosive offenses. He plays very well over the top. Great safety valve. He plays the safety position like the description of the word. He's a safety. He's literally the last line of defense. It does a great job doing that. So that's a battle that I would keep an eye on with Case Keenum, just how he's able to manipulate, a turnover machine essentially in Detroit's secondary.
Yeah, I think that's going to be important. Glover Quinn has transformed some of these games with the way he's been able to play, and it's not necessarily always standing on the box score, but he's able to just manipulate things in ways that most safeties are not able to. So I do think I agree with that. That Pat Shurmur can sort of develop things in a way that kind of prevents that from happening. But I also say that it's going to be important for Case Keenum to be decisive when he thinks something is open, make the throw immediately, and not wait and allow Quinn to make a play on things. I think we saw that a couple times last week in those interceptions where Winston would stare something down, and wait to make that throw when it, while it was open, kind of almost double checking to make sure. And then that resulted in Mike Evans almost dying on the one. And then, I think the other one was when Deshaun Jackson was covered over the middle and he just made a bad throw and Sendejo picked it off. So bottom line here is Case Keenum needs to be decisive and know where Glover Quinn is at all times.
Right. And that's, it's one of those easier said than done things, right? Just know where Glover Quinn is. Well, yeah, obviously the defense is disguised to make it difficult to know where he's supposed to be, where he's going to be. But, in the simplest sense, know where Glover Quinn is. Make sure you're kind of controlling him with your eyes, and make sure that your route combinations aren't just working to his favor. If you're just throwing crossers over the middle, and if you do it too regularly, he's just going to sit at the end of the route, and whether that's either going to be a dead play on an incompletion or you're throwing it right into his breadbasket. So this is a guy that's very dangerous, and to some degree you have to account for him offensively and with your play calling and just the way that your plays are designed. He makes it difficult for you. So we'll see what Case Keenum is able to do against Glover Quinn, and obviously don't forget about Darius Slay either. Those are two very good defensive players in the secondary, and Quandre Diggs, the quote undersized slot cornerback, has been Captain Munnerlyn-esque this season. So keep an eye on him as well, and see if he is going to be the first guy to really tame Adam Thielen in the slot. So let's finish up the show here with Let's go a little Friday frenzy first. What's on what's on your mind here? We got a great matchup tonight with Green Bay and Seattle. But anything else going on in your mind relative to the NFL for over the last couple of weeks since we last talked?
The Los Angeles Rams, I think, are they good or are they not good? I mean, I don't know because offensively they look good. Jared Goff looks like he's much more comfortable than he was under Jeff Fisher, but at the same time, their 2 wins are against the Colts and the 49ers. So I don't know if I'm supposed to buy into them or not, but I mean, and then you mentioned Seattle too. I wanted to touch on them because I don't know. I mean, are they going to be this year's Minnesota Vikings where there's talent on every single spot of the roster except for the offensive line, and it's like, D2 level, so
Yeah.
it holds them back, significantly and makes a difference in 3 games. I mean, I think that NFC West is interesting because the Rams are suddenly kind of controlling things there. And do you remember when the NFC West was like, was it 2010 when a 7-9 team won the division?
Yeah, when it was Seattle,
like
San Francisco.
It's very possible that division turns out that way again, I think, because the Seahawks they aren't that impressive. When you look at the offensive line with all their weapons, I think.
And how much the offensive line is hurting them. Yeah.
8-9 wins there is not. I mean, that's possible. And then you have the Rams who are still developing. They have some pieces, but they haven't played anybody yet, so we don't know. The 49ers are 49ers. The Cardinals, Carson Palmer is #washed. So.
And no David Johnson. So.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, that's an interesting point. I mean, I think the Rams are kind of the sexy pick, honestly, in the West right now. Sean McVay is doing a hell of a job out there for sure.
All those fans of the Rams in Los Angeles, all like 40,000 people that go to those games.
Yeah, they definitely deserve a title. I'll reserve my Friday frenzy this week for the Tennessee Titans. I think that finally last week they got that big win over Seattle, so I could start talking about the fact that I really like this team, and I think that their rebuilding process has been as good as anyone has done, ever. I mean, think about how quickly this team is rebuilt with basically just stealing picks from teams. They got all of the Rams picks, and they did a great job with that rebuild. They've got Marcus Mariota in there now. There's talent on virtually every level of their defense. I love the Tennessee Titans. So AFC South historically has been probably my least favorite division to watch. I pretty much think every team in that division is either extremely boring or the team is just not good at all and has Andrew Luck, and that makes it kind of exciting. So it's nice to see the AFC South showing some fight with Marcus Mariota. So that concludes my Friday frenzy here. And
well done.
Thank you. Let's move into our picks for this week, which, like I said, it's not going too well. Last week, I was 5-11. Drew was 8-8. So on the season now, I am 21-24. Drew is 28-17. So maybe just start picking what we don't say. I don't know.
What you don't say. No, I'm still doing okay.
Whatever.
I'm not wonderful, but I mean, I'm much more trustworthy than you are, as far as I'm concerned.
Fair. That's fair. Also a small sample size, though. We're only 3 weeks in. So for week 4, starting with Chicago and Green Bay tonight, who you got?
Packers.
I do as well. Detroit, Minnesota at noon on Sunday.
I picked the Vikings on the Vikings Territory roundtable this week, and then I thought about it some more, looked at some more things, and I am now picking the Lions to win this game. I mean, they should be a 3-0 team, and the Lions have been the kryptonite the last couple of years. Case Keenum's the starting quarterback. I cannot pick the Vikings.
I'll pick Minnesota. So
good.
Yeah.
I hope you're right, but you haven't been lately, so I don't know about that.
Yep, I hope I'm right too. New Orleans at Miami.
I have Miami here. I'm not really sure why, because I believe they just lost to the Jets.
Yeah,
so,
I have New Orleans because they just lost to the Jets. So looking to gain some ground with that game. Buffalo at ATL. I think that one's
Falcons. Yep.
Pretty self-explanatory. The barn burner of the week, Cincinnati at Cleveland. Who you got?
I got the Browns here, and I've thought about using this as my survivor pick, just because you'll like to save, the Falcons and the Patriots for later.
Yep.
But I think the Browns at home will pull out their first win of the season because the Bengals are bad, and I think Marvin Lewis will get fired next week.
Yeah, I've got Cincinnati just because I need to gain ground on Drew. So, L.A. Rams at Dallas Cowboys. Who you got?
I have the Cowboys. They don't look great right now, but I'm not ready to buy into the Rams quite yet.
I like the Rams. I like Sean McVay. I don't like the Cowboys. I don't like Jason Garrett. So I'm going to pick the Rams. Period. Carolina at New England.
Yeah, Patriots.
Patriots. I felt that one would be unanimous, but out of respect to Carolina because they're not a bad team, I figured I'd pose it anyways. Jacksonville at New York Jets. Pretty hilarious.
I'm gonna go to the Jets in this one. I think I initially picked Jacksonville, but I'm gonna change to the Jets just because you picked the Jags. Looks like, so I want to mix it up.
Ew, yeah, I'm gonna pick Jacksonville. Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid with your lead. Pittsburgh at Baltimore.
Pittsburgh.
Tennessee at Houston. I've obviously got Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee.
San Francisco at Arizona.
Give me the Cards.
I'm going to take the San Francisco 49ers by a hair. Again, partially because I'm trying to catch up with Drew again. Philadelphia at LA Chargers.
The Chargers have to win one of those, those games where they contend all the way into the fourth quarter against a good team and then they give it away. One of these times they're going to win one. They're bound to win one of those, and this is that game.
Yeah, I'm going to do that too. I'm going to pick the Chargers as well. You sold me with that explanation. I'm with you on that. New York Giants at Tampa Bay.
Give me the Bucks. I'm not really sure why because they just got embarrassed, but I think the Giants are. I don't know. I think the Bucks at home are good enough here.
I'll pick the Giants because I think they're healthier. And I say that like I think
That's
they're
true.
healthier. I'm not 100%.
That's true.
So I'm picking the Giants.
Like who do they have in the secondary to match up with Odell and Brandon Marshall and Sterling Shepard?
Ryan Smith.
Smith. You won that pick this week. I'll stick with the Bucks, but
there we go. Oakland at Denver. I've got Denver. You've got Oakland.
I'll take the Raiders.
Oakland. Okay.
Just because I don't know.
All right.
I'm going different than the way you're going. I'm gonna increase my lead. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Indianapolis.
Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. At Seattle.
Yeah, you got to pick the Seahawks here.
Yeah, you hope. If Seattle loses...
The Colts go to the 12th man and win.
Yeah, burn everything if Seattle loses to Indianapolis. And then finally, the Monday night game. Pretty washed Monday night game, but...
Yep, the Redskins get 2 consecutive games on national TV, which is kind of weird.
Washington at Kansas City. I think we're probably on the same board there.
Yep, Chiefs.
Chiefs it is. All right, so there's our picks for the week. As always, thanks for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed our in-depth preview of the Detroit Lions. And make sure to join us this weekend for the pregame show that will begin at 11 a.m. We promise to actually be there, both of us, not just Drew. And by we, I mean I. So hope to see you guys at the pregame show. We'll be firing off that Shindig link on Twitter. You'll also be able to find it probably on the document on VikingsTerritory.com. So no excuses. Hope to see you guys there. If not, you can find us as always, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Vikings Territory, iHeartRadio. You guys know where we're at. On Twitter at VikingsATLPod. Make sure to fire off your takes and whatnot after the game. We'll be sure to get that in there on the Rapid Reaction Show as well. So thanks as always for listening, and we will catch you guys on Sunday.